This week, a worker at a natural gas storage tank in western Wyoming died when an explosion occurred. The man was at least the third oil and gas worker to die in Wyoming this year. Worker safety and the number of deaths that occur at drilling and storage facilities is what Jordan Wirfs-Brock of our Inside Energy team set out to look at recently. She has actually pulled together information that didn't exist before as one set of comparative data. She joins me now. Jordan, what you wanted to look at is whether this boom in the western states was leading to more danger for workers.
Yeah, what we really wanted to try to understand is how the safety can be compared state to state. So is an oil and gas worker in Wyoming as safe as an oil and gas worker in Texas or an oil and gas worker in North Dakota? And in order to do that, we actually had to look deeper than just the fatality counts and calculate a fatality rate. So looking at the size of the industry, the number of workers, how safe is the oil and gas industry in these different parts of the country?
So if we look at your first graphic here, we can see that Texas leads the way.
Yeah, Texas actually has the most oil and gas workers who have died in recent years, but Texas also has a very large and very actually mature oil and gas industry. It has roughly 10 times more oil and gas workers than North Dakota does. So to actually say, is a worker in working in oil and gas in Texas safer than one working in North Dakota, we have to look at a fatality rate, and that's what we calculated.
How did you do that exactly? You had to go and pull data from several sources?
Right, so the data on the fatality counts actually comes from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, but then I used data on the number of oil and gas workers that came from the U.S. Census Bureau. And essentially you're dividing the number of deaths over the number of workers to come up with a rate of deaths per 100,000 workers.
So let's look at that graphic, and here we can see that North Dakota is almost off the chart.
Yeah, now it's really interesting to note that North Dakota's fatality rate, which is around 75 deaths per 100,000 workers, is actually 3 times higher than it is in Texas, and it's actually 3 times higher than the national rate. So North Dakota really stands out as a state that can actually make improvements in terms of oil and gas worker safety. And it is interesting to note that when we compare oil and gas workers nationwide to other industries, an oil and gas worker is about 6 times more likely to die on the job than your average American worker.
What other industries are as dangerous as that?
It's slightly more dangerous than something like construction, but oil and gas is actually a lot safer than something like commercial fishing, which is actually one of the nation's most dangerous industries.
In North Dakota, is this because things really have boomed and happened so quickly?
Yeah, well, there has been research to show that during a boom time, so when production is ramping up very quickly, the industry is not quite as safe as when it's been going on for years or decades. And that's because companies are hiring workers very quickly. They may be hiring workers who don't have as much experience, and they're ramping things up. And so when that happens fast, it doesn't happen as safely.
And so, as it happens, the North Dakota governor got a look at this data that you put together and was pretty alarmed.
Right. So our reporter, Emily Guerin, actually had a chance to interview him and ask him what he was doing and why he wasn't doing things that other states were doing to make sure that the industry was safe. For example, Wyoming has hired a state epidemiologist to actually study oil and gas as if they were studying a disease, so taking a public health perspective. So that's kind of a solution that North Dakota could potentially look at in the future. So they don't have anything like that now, but through their conversations, the North Dakota governor did pledge to look at this more closely and to actually take some of the research to some of his advisors and cabinet members and see what solutions they can come up with.
We know the oil and gas industry is regulated pretty heavily in each of the states, and that includes safety measures, does it?
Well, it actually doesn't have its own safety regulating industry. So, for example, mining, what we think of as traditional hard rock mining or coal mining has a mining health and safety administration. There is no equivalent body for oil and gas. It doesn't have its own safety regulating administration, and that's something that could potentially improve the safety of the industry overall.
In the boom states where you have calculated the rates, we can see Colorado does not rank as high as the others. Is that because Colorado is doing a better job, or what?
You know, it's actually really hard to make solid conclusions about the worker fatality rate here in Colorado, and that is because the fatality counts are so small. For example, we know that in 2011 and 2012, only 6 oil and gas workers died. And then in last year, with the data that just came out this week, we actually don't know how many oil and gas workers died. We know that there were 4 deaths in something called mining support, which could be an oil and gas worker, but we just don't know for sure. And that data is not released because of confidentiality issues, which kind of tells you why this issue is so hard to study. It's just hard to get detailed, concrete information about worker fatalities.
But of course, that's what Inside Energy is doing, sifting the data, taking a look at many interesting things in the energy industry. Thank you, Jordan Wirfs-Brock. Just ahead, the latest from the murky world of campaign spending and whose money is being used to attack candidates in the pivotal U.S. Senate race.